It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place.
Yes, you heard that right, folks. The man, the myth, the legend, Boris Johnson, has left number 10, or at least he is going to see the Queen and resign. And it was a move I genuinely wasn't sure if it was going to happen, because Boris Johnson was basically being a bulwark this entire week against an absolute waterfall of resignations. And when I say a waterfall of resignations, I mean a waterfall of resignations. There were so many that Sky News even had a government resignations counter for the last few days on their 24-hour news channel. And if you think 31 MPs was a lot, it doesn't even compare to the final graph that is being made by the Institute for Government, which, as you can see here, they had to extend the y-axis just for the amount of resignations under Boris Johnson. As you can see, usually there's a steady line going upwards over time. With Boris Johnson, it was at the higher end, even higher than May at the start, but then he seemed to have a strong and stable government coming into his second year. And then you get to the end of his third year and it just spikes up. It's just insane how many MPs resigned from their posts because they didn't trust Boris Johnson or believe that he was a capable leader anymore. Though one of the funniest things about this is that on the day where 59 MPs resigned, Boris Johnson still found time, and it was just in time in fact, to fire Michael Gove from his position as Minister for Levelling Up. Literally in the last minute before Michael Gove would threaten to resign, Boris Johnson calls him and says, "You're fired." Though there were still other times that all you could do was laugh with what was going on with the government, because after Rishi Sunak resigned as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Boris Johnson quickly replaced him with Nadhim Zawali, because he threatened to resign as well unless he was given a better position than Education Secretary. But not even 48 hours after getting that job, along with Michelle Donnellan, who replaced Zahawi as the Education Secretary, she stepped down after 48 hours, and Zahawi had to turn around to Johnson and say, "Look, you gotta go, man." And amazingly, even though she only held the job for 2 days and probably didn't do anything, she will still likely be getting the severance package of about £16,000. It's insane the way this country has been going, but honestly, all I can do is laugh. So we may as well go through a quick crash course of the major events that meant that Boris Johnson had to resign today. So our first big story comes from November of 2021, where the first of the Partygate scandal stories came out, in which it was reported that under lockdown, 3 gatherings almost a year earlier in 2020 were being held at Downing Street by Boris Johnson after he locked down the entire country and said, "No, you cannot mix in groups of bigger than 6, or who even remember the rules at this point. Point is, it was alleged that they were breaking rules that they themselves had made to enforce upon the entire country. Naturally, this was headline news for the media for well over a year, even past the point where people were fined for breaking the lockdown rules, and really we should have moved past it. But I don't want to undersell how much this affected Boris Johnson's position as Prime Minister. He is there enforcing these laws and breaking them himself, which I personally didn't really care about because everyone was breaking those laws. But I can completely understand the hypocrisy argument where you're making the laws, you have to be whiter than white when you follow them. But we're in the age of the hypocrites, so that's not generally happening these days. But then we come to April 2nd, 2022, where David Warburton, the MP for Somerton and Frome, had the Conservative whip withdrawn after allegations of sexual harassment and cocaine usage emerged. Mr Warburton is said to deny all wrongdoing, and on 29 of June he posted an update on his website stating that an investigation is underway. He wrote, "It has been immensely difficult not to speak out, but I have steadfastly adhered to a very strict rules of confidentiality and will continue to do so until the investigation concludes. Then I will have much to say. I must say that I'm delighted that finally the investigation is underway." And then on 21 June, the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards announced a probe into whether he breached the MP's Code of Conduct on 3 counts, including paid advocacy. So I know that this is just an accusation of sexual misconduct. I know that he is innocent until proven guilty, but it is important to state because it is the first of many allegations. And the problem is, 1, maybe 2 allegations you don't really need to pay much mind to. But man, these cases just kept coming and coming and coming over the course of the year. And I do mean that, because literally a week later, the next in a series of cases that renewed scrutiny of sleaze in Westminster came when Imran Ahmed Khan, the then Tory MP for Wakefield, was found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy in 2008. Khan, who maintains his innocence, was expelled from the Conservative Party and resigned, triggering a by-election that Labour won in June. Khan was jailed for 18 months in May. So already we've jumped from allegations to a guy has been put in prison for 18 months and has to be expelled from the party. You know, that's quite a jump, and if this was just the one case again, it would be like, you know, it's embarrassing for the government, but honestly, we can get over this. But it also doesn't help that in the same week, Mr Johnson and Mr Sunak were fined for attending the Prime Minister's birthday bash in Downing Street in June 2022, when lockdown was in full swing, and they were absolutely not supposed to be doing that, especially if they enforced that law. And also later in April, he faced the prospect of an investigation in Parliament after MPs agreed to refer to him to them after claims that he had lied to Parliament about the parties, which, let's be fair, he did. And then we come into May and there's even more sexual misconduct going on. Neil Parish had to quit his seat on the 4th of May in Tiverton and Honiton after admitting to watching pornography in the Commons. He said he accidentally viewed an X-rated video when browsing for tractors, which I'm sure is a problem we've all run into, before later doing so deliberately in the chamber. He got a little taste and just couldn't wait till he got home to watch a bit more. Tiverton and Honiton was snatched by the Lib Dems in the June by-election, overturning a Conservative majority of more than 24,000. It's been a disaster, a total disaster. If that wasn't the worst thing to happen in May, on May 17, an unnamed Conservative MP was arrested on suspicion of rape and sexual assault offences spanning 7 years. Tory Chief Whip Mr Heaton Harris urged the MP to stay away from Parliament, but did not suspend the whip. I mean, I made a video back in April before these two allegations about the Tories not being able to catch a break. I didn't realise over the next couple of months they'd be way worse. I thought that was the worst we'd get, the Tory MP who sexually assaulted a 15-year-old boy. No, we've got a 7-year span of rape and another one that just watches porn in the House of Commons. I don't know what is going through their minds, but no wonder Boris Johnson got kicked out. This would have been enough. But there's still more to go. May 25, Ms Gray published her full report into lockdown-busting parties in Number 10 and Whitehall, detailing events at which officials drank so much they were sick, sang karaoke, became involved in altercations, and abused security and cleaning staff at the time when millions of people across the country were unable to see friends and family. Prime Minister said he took full responsibility for the scandal and calls for his resignation grew louder. This was back in May. We are currently in July. 6th of June, the government's anti-corruption czar resigned from his post and called on the Prime Minister to do the same, accusing him of breaking the ministerial code. John Penrose, Conservative MP for Western Supermare, said Mr Johnson had failed to address the Shu Gray report's very serious criticisms of his leadership at 10 Downing Street. None of this is untrue. All of this is true. All of these are fair accusations. The anti-corruption czar, I think, did the principled thing in resigning his post. Because how can he possibly be an anti-corruption czar if the Prime Minister is clearly acting in a corrupt manner? But the final straw came at the end of June going into July. On June 30, Chris Pincher dramatically resigned as Deputy Chief Whip after allegedly groping 2 fellow guests at the evening before at the Carlton Club, a Tory private members club in London. Downing Street said Mr Johnson was not aware of any specific allegations about Mr Pincher when he appointed him as the Whip's office, but it emerged over the following days that he was told about allegations against him as far back as 2019, and not only that, he even referred to him as Handsy, and was even remarked as saying about him, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. So again, Boris Johnson's just lying. But on July 5th, Mr Johnson was forced into a humiliating apology over his handling of the Chris Pincher row, after it emerged he had forgotten about being told of previous allegations of inappropriate conduct. Out of all excuses Mr Johnson comes up with, I forgot about it has to be one of the weakest. In the Commons, the atmosphere among Tory MPs was mutinous, with critics lining up to condemn Number 10's handling of the matter. Mr Sunak then quit as Chancellor and Mr Javid stepped down as Health Secretary, both writing incendiary resignation letters, and then you know the story from there because you had a whole waterfall of MPs resigning. And that's where we're up to now. But they are the biggest scandals that have been coming out over the past 9 months or so. I said last night on a stream on the Wellington Project that with the Tories, they literally have not been able to be scandalous unless they are simply not sitting in Parliament. But even from that quick timeline, the only month when nothing happened was March. But that made it worse because then come April, May, June, July, a bunch of allegations and a bunch of controversies came out from many, many places, showing that the Tory government under Boris Johnson was corrupt. Sleazy, I don't think, quite even covers it. There were literal rapes being committed by MPs. And that also, it's pretty clear that he's a serial liar, but to be honest, from my perspective, all politicians are liars anyway, so that one I don't really care about. But from the eyes of the MPs, and more than likely from the Tory members as well, in fact, I know for a fact from the Tory members as well, because most of them think he should have resigned, he was not in a position to keep his power as Prime Minister, and so, as you saw at the beginning, made a little speech saying that he is going to resign, and he's probably going to the Queen later today, after a timetable for how picking the next leader is going to go. But Boris will not be seen as he wants to be seen, which is as one of Britain's greatest Prime Ministers. Instead, he will probably be seen as in the lower half. I see a lot of people knee-jerking and saying he's the worst Prime Minister we've ever had. That's not true. Ted Heath was worse. And then name any Labour Prime Minister, basically all of them were terrible post-war. And to be honest, I think when looking back on COVID, I think a lot of people are going to change their mind and say that Boris Johnson actually probably handled it pretty well, especially from a normie perspective. From my perspective, we basically never should have locked down, or if we did, it should have been for a maximum of about 2 weeks. It was basically copy China policy that the rest of Europe did. But really, when our excess deaths from COVID are pretty below average compared to other highly densely populated European countries, we actually did pretty well, and with the lockdown measures, we were less draconian than quite a lot of Europe. Obviously not more than Scandinavia, but on the whole it wasn't too bad. Though there is the unfortunate statistic that because we had to go through lockdown thanks to Boris Johnson and thanks to the furlough scheme and the amount of borrowing we had to do, his graph on how much debt he accrued in his tenure, it looks pretty awful. Though, to be fair, the only graph that looks really good here is Thatcher's, because it basically only grows a bit and then starts going down at the end, whereas Blair and Brown, as you can see, they start off pretty well, and then it just racks up under Brown. So while Boris Johnson would want to see himself as a great British leader of the bulwark against Europe by getting Brexit done, getting back our laws, relocking down our borders, and getting economic growth back on track, he instead increased the debt by a shed load, due to peer pressure from the rest of Europe, and the media of course. Hasn't managed to do too much about immigration, we're still at incredibly high numbers, and unfortunately he's probably going to be most remembered for breaking his own lockdown rules, and being the Prime Minister where all the gay rapists came out. What a memory. What a memory. Though, now of course, it's the whole bid for who's going to be next Tory leader. It is my hope that we don't get anyone who is wet. Which, as you can see from the polling on screen, the most likely person to win is Ben Wallace, followed by Penny Mordaunt, followed by Rishi Sunak and, of course, Liz Truss. For reference, we can go through the Telegraph profile on each one. So firstly, Ben Wallace. Mr Wallace has been Defence Secretary for the entirety of Mr Johnson's premiership, assuming the role in July 2019, when Prime Minister entered Downing Street. His handling of the response to the Ukraine invasion has seen him widely touted as the future Prime Minister, although he has played down any interest in the top job. One Tory backbencher told the Telegraph there would be a coronation from Mr Wallace in the event of a leadership vacuum, as he would be capable of attracting support from all wings of the party. He ranks highest in polls, asking Conservative grassroots supporters who they want as their next leader. Which is true, but this is just from initial polls, and obviously as time goes on and as the leadership bid goes on, you may see, in my case, I really hope you see, some underdogs coming out on top. Having said this, the Telegraph haven't put in his rather large blunder, in which Russian hoax callers called him and pretended to be President Zelensky of Ukraine, basically asking if we have any more armaments, and Ben Wallace basically gave away state secrets, saying that we don't have any more of some particular armaments. So the Russian managed to get some more British intelligence, which is obviously something that you don't want. But hey, he's top of the running because people like the war in Ukraine. Because fighting anything remotely Hitler-esque is what all the normies want, because our entire myth is based around World War II. Anyway, moving on. Penny Mordaunt. Ms Mordaunt was a supporter of Jeremy Hunt in the 2019 leadership election, so she's very wet, which saw her leave the cabinet. She later became Paymaster General in 2020 and then moved to the Department for International Trade, she is heavily rumoured to have leadership ambitions. She has at times been critical of government policy, and there have been reports that allies of rival purported leadership campaigns have compiled a dossier of all these occasions. On May 28, after the publication of the full Sue Gray report, Ms Mordaunt told the BBC that she was angry at those in Downing Street who ignored COVID rules while blocking reasonable requests to relax restrictions. So she also seems to be anti-lockdown, so not completely wet it seems. But you're going to need to do some damn good convincing of me to convince you're not a wet if you supported Jeremy Hunt. The man was the most cardboard cutout for globalist, leftist, just the worst parts of the Tory party put into a man with absolutely no charisma. It's no wonder Boris Johnson won. Next up we have Rishi Sunak, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer since February 2020, and he was long considered a natural heir to succeed Mr Johnson as the future leader of the Tory party. Offering his resignation on Tuesday evening, he said, "I am sad to be leaving government, but I have reluctantly come to the conclusion that we cannot continue like this." He went on to say that the public rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously, and added that these standards are worth fighting for. Earlier this year, Mr Sunak's leadership credentials were denied by a backlash over his wife's non-domiciled tax status and the revelation he had held an American green card while still Chancellor. I didn't realise that we weren't allowed to do that. But that was another reason for having some scandals around Johnson, because Mr Sunak's wife had non-domiciled tax status, which meant that she was basically tax dodging while he was Chancellor, which is not a good look. However, his low tax, Thatcherite instincts are popular among Conservative membership, and his popularity among members increased again this month amid a wealth of measures to support Britons through the cost of living crisis. Whereas in reality, taxes have only increased since February 2020. So I don't know why people think he's got a Thatcherite instinct and wants low tax. I can't see that anywhere. I don't know what they're referring to when they say that. But as you can see, these top three contenders are fairly wet. And the reason I think a lot of Tories want wet leaders is because it's less likely you're going to have someone like Boris Johnson who's going to bring in a load of controversy. They want someone who's basically Blair, because everyone likes Blair in this country. Unless you actually pay attention to the things he did, and then he seems like the worst type of person. He's a real mixed bag. People either love him or hate him. It's really weird. And if they do hate him, it's usually because he went into a completely unjustified war in Iraq, rather than the fact that he completely destroyed Britain culturally. But anyway, I think we should quickly talk about who my favourite is, which is Steve Baker, who was the bottom of that particular poll of popularity among Tory members. Steve Baker has been hinting for several days that he is planning to stand for the leader of the post-Johnson Conservative Party, but has laid out his intentions to Times Radio this morning, and he's been on loads and loads of media platforms to try and promote himself, which screams to me that he is really going to try and become PM. But he said that he has been asked to stand by many people and that it would be dismissive and disrespectful not to take their demands seriously, but did admit as a backbencher that it would be quite improbable to be given the job. Over the last 7 years, when the chips have been down, I've actually provided leadership sometimes to as much as a third of the Tory party. So people do know that I'm a leader and I have led. And they know that the Conservative Home membership quite often routinely puts me in the top 10 for next leader. So it would be dismissive and disrespectful if I didn't take seriously what they're telling me through these polls. So of course I'm seriously considering it, but you and I both know it's quite improbable for any backbencher without experience to become Prime Minister, and I'm really ruthlessly realistic about that. Well, I regard the prospect with something akin to dread. I mean, it's a terrible thing to be Prime Minister, is plainly a terrible thing. But the fact is it needs to be done. I'm afraid, I am sufficiently battle-hardened that I am confident if I become Prime Minister this afternoon, I would do a better job than the present government. But that, of course, at the moment would not be very hard. And so already, even without looking at his policies or anything like that, there are two reasons there why I would want him to win. One, he's a complete underdog. Was at 40-1, according to the Telegraph there. And he's bottoming in the polls for leadership at the moment. But also, he's clearly the type of person who doesn't particularly want the job, but thinks he would be good at it. And that is the exact type of person you want as Prime Minister, because you know they are not going to squander the opportunity to run the country as they see fit. Which for Steve Baker, out of all MPs, he is probably in the top 10 of people that I agree with most on issues. He's a libertarian, more or less. He wants less totalitarian and hate speech laws. He wants lower taxes, lower public spending. He wants to sort the debt out. He was consistently not particularly for the lockdown measures. He was your typical backbencher. He is relatively dry. He does have issues, don't get me wrong, because there are the famous quotes where he says he believes in white privilege and that maybe there's something to be understood from critical race theory, but as time goes on, he seems to be walking back comments like that and does generally seem to be quite bang on quite a lot of issues, and it's quite rare that he goes directly opposite of what I want on issues, and even if he does, give it time, he seems to see the error of his ways. Which is about all you can expect from an MP. I mean, I'm looking at it realistically here. You know, ideally, I'd just have a load of me's in the House of Commons. I'd absolutely strip it down to have about 10 MPs running the country and have it so they can't put tax above 5%. But that's not realistic, so we have to use the tools that we have at our disposal. Steve Baker seems to be one of our best tools for running the country. So the official Haryan Gláeddyv line now is that I back Baker. Baker for PM. Enough is enough. I am fed up of incompetent prime ministers. We have had them all the way since Cameron. Well, going even further back, we have had incompetent prime ministers since Thatcher. If you want a real Thatcherite or post-Thatcherite, you're looking at Steve Baker. Is he perfect? No. Does he want the job? No. Does that make him perfect for the job? No, but it makes him a damn sight better than most other MPs. And if you disagree, do let me know in the comments and do let me know who you'd prefer. I do want to make it clear that I would be going after Dominic Raab, but unfortunately Dominic Raab has already stated he's not going for the leadership bid. As I say, we've got to do with the tools that we are given. Steve Baker seems to be the best one. I'm putting my support behind him. But this will be a hell of a lot of content for my channel because leadership bids are usually always good fun. And if we do manage to meme Steve Baker into office, then I'll know meme magic is real. It's been real once before with Trump, and with Steve Baker it'll be a hell of a lot harder. But my god, the guy just seems nice, the guy seems smart, and the guy seems charismatic. So, let's hope for the best. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today, so as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.